Hey, what's up? It's Tati and I'm back with another review of Tales from the Territories, and this week we are talking about Jim Crockett Promotions, also known as Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. Now for this episode, the interviews were a little bit different. So we had Jim Cornette doing interviews on his own, and we also had Nikita Koloff also doing interviews on his own. And then we had a panel of four, which was Baby Doll, David Crockett, Arn Anderson, and Ricky Morton. And watching this episode, I just realized that I missed the tag team match where they wrestled the Briscoes. So after this, I'm definitely going to check that out. I can't believe I totally forgot about that match. Jim Crockett Promotions were one of the most popular territories. Now, guys, without this territory, I'm telling you, there would have been no WCW. They were bought out by Ted Turner in '88, so the rest is history. I don't even have to go into details about that. But this promotion was founded back in 1935 by Jim Crockett, and they joined the NWA in 1952. Now, unfortunately, this episode does not go into specifics about the history. They focus mainly about wrestling during the 80s. Obviously, this was some of the biggest times in pro wrestling in history, so this was a main focus in this episode. So they were making so much money by the time Starrcade 86 came around. Like, they were living like rock stars. Everyone loved wrestling and wrestlers. I mean, they were making so much money, and at some point, you know, these guys, they weren't making much money wrestling. So it came to a point where, you know, they were on TV for about 4 hours a week and everyone knew who they were. And with them making so much money, Arn Anderson talked about how one time him, Tully, and what's his name, Lex Luger, went to Mercedes dealership and they all bought a car like they were fucking grocery shopping. Like, it was absolutely nothing because they were finally making the type of money that they wanted to make in pro wrestling. It was absolutely huge. And one of the reasons why people kept flocking to watch Jim Crockett Promotions was because of the heels. Like, the villains were a huge aspect in professional wrestling. So they had also Dusty Rhodes being a booker, being a promoter, being a huge asset no matter where he went, was absolutely a game changer for this promotion. And one of the people who had got the biggest heat was Jim Cornette, who started off, believe it or not, as a photographer and was just given the chance to just go out there and be one of those guys, and he was absolutely amazing. So Jim Cornette, he caught major heat with the fans. Everyone loved to hate him, and he loved to be hated as well. He did his job absolutely perfectly. Now, he did have a feud with Baby Doll, and at one point he took his racket and hit her in the stomach, and the announcers basically were making it a huge deal, talking about he hit her so hard that she wouldn't have children again. And now the audience is even more mad because they said that, oh my god, they loved her, she can't have no more kids because of what he did. Obviously not true, but the audience, they bought it. And later on, not too long after that, Baby Doll comes out with the James Boys. Now they end up picking him up, put a noose around his neck, and now they're going to put him, tie him up in the back of a pickup truck. So Jim obviously he's in on it. He knows what's going to happen, and they're supposed to tap on the back of the truck, signaling him to, you know, hold on to the rope. So basically he's taking his hand and he's putting it on the rope so that there isn't any so that it wasn't not pushing against his neck and choke him and he'll end up dying. But Baby Doll was so excited about things. Like, she just was just too excited, and she ends up literally like dropping her foot down on the gas, and she took off. But before she could take off, Midnight Express, they ended up taking the rope off of Cornette, and had they not done that, she literally would have snapped his neck and he would have died. That was absolutely scary. I was looking on YouTube to see if I can find this clip because they did show it on the show, but unfortunately I couldn't find it. I'll keep looking, but Would you see how fast she haul ass with that truck? She literally would have killed him. Now, that's not the only crazy situation he's been. Now, back in Starrcade 86, there was a scaffold match, and for whatever reason, known to man, that was not the last scaffold match in wrestling history, if you know what I'm talking about. So now they're having this match, Midnight Express versus the Road Warriors, and Cornette is supposed to take a nasty bump from the top of the scaffold, and obviously he's scared to do this, but this is part of his job, and this bump would make, you know, the audience happy, so he's willing to do this. But he talks to Big Bubba and he's like, yo, you need to catch my ass when I come down there, and we'll just fall down together. So he's huge and he'll break his fall, and when Jim actually falls down, Bubba is like a good 2 to 3 feet away, like nowhere near catching him. Even if he would have put his arms out there, he probably wouldn't even break the fall, and Cornette ends up tearing his ACL. And him being that type of guy who was all about the business, that didn't keep him from, you know, going to work. He still came back even with injuries, and that's what a lot of wrestlers do. But you know, he had an advantage because he's not actually a wrestler and didn't have to get in the ring and wrestle, so it was something that worked out for him, even though he had to work through his injuries. Another important moment that they talked about was the riot at the Omni. Now, the Omni Coliseum was a very popular venue that was in Atlanta, Georgia. So there was Ric Flair and the Russians. They were in a ring, and the Russians are basically handing Ric Flair his own ass. And at some point, we have Dusty Rhodes come out to the ring, and he's Superman. He's saving Ric Flair's ass. And then we had the Andersons also got involved. So basically, while Rick was still like heel, everyone hated the Russians even more. So now this makes him look good. So everyone's excited, Dusty's helping, and then out of the blue, you have Ric Flair, who said fuck that and just started beating on Dusty too. Now everyone is shocked because he came out and helped him. Why would he turn his back on him? And what made this even more scary was people were so upset. People were trying to get in the ring, like literally climbing onto the cage, and the wrestlers were trying to like shake the cage to keep people from coming in, and they also had to hold down the cage door to keep the fans from coming in. So it got to the point that the police had to get involved. Like they like came mob deep and was getting everybody away from the ring, and unfortunately that wasn't so successful. They were able to get the Andersons and Ric Flair outside of the ring, but now they have to walk to the back. They got to walk to the locker room, and they have to go through the crowd in order to do so. So there are, I don't know, maybe like 10 officers or so. Obviously not enough compared to everyone who's angry in the crowd, so they have to go through this crowd to get to the back. Now everybody's packed like sardines because everyone is throwing things at them. They are hitting them. The police officers are doing their best to help, but unfortunately there's just not enough help. And the police officers were like, just get to the back. They couldn't even move because there was so much people there. And they even had trouble breathing because there was just so much people so close together, and they were having trouble getting to the back because there was just so much people. And Arn said that he thought that he probably would die before making it to the locker room. That's how crazy it was. By the time they made it to the locker room, all three of them was absolutely bloodied. People were throwing glass and bottles and things at them, and by the time they got back there, they was just trying to catch their breath. And they noticed the aftermath after they were able to get away from everybody. Now this was the consequences of being a heel. Like people were so invested into it. And even Jim Cornette, he would talk about how he often got hurt by the fans as well, including having to wear a bulletproof vest because it was just happening so often. You never know what was going to happen, and the fans were just so invested into it that they would get involved. Now nowadays you'll never see anything like that. Maybe at like an independent show or something like that, where people would be a little bit more personal with the wrestlers. They can probably get away with something not as extreme, but something where they can be maybe physical with another wrestler in some type of way. But you'll never see something like that in any of the big promotions out right now. In this episode, we did have interviews with Nikita Koloff. Now, he got a chance to talk about his time at Jim Crockett Promotions, where he was always in character. Even when he was in the locker room, other wrestlers had to remind him all the time, like, bro, we all know what's up. You don't even need to keep in character back here. But it was so important for him to keep in character. And, you know, the fans, they believe he was actually Russian. So much so that one time he went grocery shopping and a little kid came up to him speaking in Russian. And he freaked out for a moment because he actually didn't speak Russian and he didn't really know how to respond. So he started basically mumbling at him, and then he realized, I'm heel, I don't even have to respond to this kid. If I just walk off, he's just gonna think that that's exactly what I would do as a heel. So he ends up walking off and not exposing himself by actually responding. He was so much invested that when his daughter was born, he put on her little tag on her incubator that she was from Lithuania, and obviously not true. And also gave the Koloff last name. Now, he actually did legally change his name, so he was not Russian and he came from Minnesota. And it was really interesting to see him, and he looked really, really great in this episode. Oh, and also he had auditioned for Rocky IV. Obviously didn't get the role, but they stated that they liked his acting, but in all the shots that they filmed him with Sylvester Stallone, he was just like a monster, just towering over him, and it just didn't look good as far as the camera go. But it would have been interesting to see if, you know, him taking that role in the movie. So one of the most defining moments for this promotion was the plane crash in 1985. We had David Crockett, Bob Bruggers, Johnny Valentine, Ric Flair, and Tim Woods on this flight. Now, what happened was that they were going from Charlotte to Willingham, North Carolina. They had a sold out show, and it's quicker to go by plane than to, you know, take the bus or a car or whatever. So now what happened is that David kind of made like a joke about how if they ran out of gas, and sure enough, that's what happened. So one of the engine ended up failing, and oddly enough, the engine ended up failing not too far from a little small airport. And for whatever reason, the pilot didn't think to stop there in case if they wouldn't make it with whatever gas they had. So now they keep going, and after passing like a small river, they end up, the other engine end up failing, and they end up crashing. Now with this crash, you know, no one died or whatever, but there were a lot of injuries. So Rick and David, they end up being in hospital for 2 weeks together, and Rick was out of action for 6 months with a broken back amongst other injuries. And then we had Johnny and Bob, whose injuries were so bad that they were not able to wrestle again. And Tim, for whatever reason, rather than thinking about him being hurt, he was just worried about, what if the fans find out I was on this plane with other heels? People, this is definitely breaking kayfabe if they knew that I was on this plane. So when the police came to the scene and they asked for everyone's name, he gives his real name, which is George Wooden, and he said that he was a promoter. So now this story got national headlines. Everyone in the United States knew about this, and especially the locals, they knew about it. And it made people question, especially the locals, like, hold on, who the hell is George Wooden? There is no promoter with this name. So people started spreading rumors that it was really Tim who was on this flight. So now Tim, he's hearing the rumors, he's in the hospital, and then he decides to leave the hospital against the doctor's wishes, I believe, 3 days later, so he can go to an event so that he can show people, hey, if I was on this flight, why am I here? Why wouldn't I be in the hospital hurt like everyone else? And people ended up buying it. So he knew that even though this situation was absolutely horrible and he had broken ribs and other injuries, he still had to come out there because he wanted to protect kayfabe, and that was so important for him. And to be completely honest, I can't even believe that he would do something like that. In the end, that did end up working for the company, and they sticked around for another 3 years before they were bought out by Ted Turner. And man, I can't believe that he would even do something like that. But hey, once you love the business, you end up doing things, end up sacrificing your own health, your own well-being, just to save the business. Now, one of the craziest story from this episode was Rick Morton. Now, y'all know Tully Blanchard, he ended up, giving his life to God, and he would be going on TV shows and giving testimonies and all that stuff. Now, for one of these shows, it's called the 700 Club. I don't know if you guys have, maybe your parents was watching it and y'all end up seeing this, but I remember seeing this as a kid. Now, like, people will come and give their testimonies or whatever, and they'll worship God or whatever situation is. So one night, Rick's wife's like, she want to watch the show, and Tully's on. And during the show, Tully is talking about specifically when he and Rick and other people were doing drugs and sleeping around with a whole bunch of hoes from town to town. And his wife is absolutely pissed off because that's how she's finding out on national TV how her husband did her wrong. That was absolutely crazy, that the time that you actually wanted to watch this, now you're finding out information specifically about your marriage. That was absolutely crazy. Hard way to find out that your husband cheated on you. So now next week we have Mid-South Wrestling. We're going to have JR, Ted DiBiase, Michael P.S. Hayes, and also Jake the Snake Roberts. They will be talking about their time in the territory. And oh my god, when I saw this, I screamed like a little girl. I'm so happy to see that. So come back next week and watch me review that episode. Bye.